Are you happy Karmelo Anthony is home? Well, you a sick motherfucker. Every last one of y'all. Yes, I'm very much aware I'm black. I'm very much aware Karmelo Anthony is black. There's something wrong with y'all. Y'all defending a red rum. It don't matter what's going on.
You're sitting in the courtroom when the words hit harder than anyone expected. Karmelo Anthony will remain free, at least for now. No detention, no remand. Just a decision that sends shockwaves through a room already stretched to its emotional limit. But the cameras don't catch everything. They don't catch Jeffery Metcalf, the father of Austin, clutching the edge of the bench with both hands, as if trying to stop himself from falling apart. His chest rises sharply. His eyes fill instantly. And before the gavel can even drop to close the session, he's already breaking. You hear it before you see it. A choking sound, somewhere between a cry and a gasp. And suddenly the courtroom is frozen. No one moves. Even the judge, for a moment, doesn't speak. And in that silence, Jeffrey's pain becomes the loudest thing in the room. He doesn't shout. He doesn't curse. He simply says, "He killed my boy, and you let him walk." The words echo low and raw, like a wound being opened all over again. A bailiff moves toward him slowly, offering an arm, but Jeffrey doesn't leave right away. He just stands there, broken and staring, not at Karmelo, not at the judge, but at the space where his son should have been. You can't look away, because this isn't about a legal technicality or a procedural delay. This is a father watching the system hand a second chance to the boy who took his son's only one. And you start to ask yourself, what does justice look like when it leaves the victims behind? How much strength does it take to break down and still stay standing? And how much more can this family be asked to endure? Because in that moment, it was clear. The trial may continue, but something irreparable just happened, and no verdict will ever fix it. The moment Jeffery Metcalf breaks down doesn't just stay in the courtroom, it ripples out into the world like a tidal wave. Within minutes, someone posts a blurry clip of him trembling at the bench, voice cracking as he repeats the same words. "He killed my boy, and you let him walk." It goes viral. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's real. There's no grandstanding, no speeches, just raw pain, and it hits harder than any headline. You scroll through the comments, and it's a flood of disbelief, grief, and outrage. You could feel his soul cracking. How do you stay calm when the system tells you your son's life didn't matter? This broke me. But not everyone is silent. A handful of Karmelo supporters attempt to defend the decision, saying he hasn't been convicted, that due process matters. But those voices are quickly drowned out, not by hate, but by heartbreak. This isn't about guilt anymore, it's about grief. The moment Jeffery Metcalf breaks down doesn't just stay in the courtroom, it ripples out into the world like a tidal wave. Within minutes, someone posts a blurry clip of him trembling at the bench, voice cracking as he repeats the same words. "He killed my boy, and you let him walk." It goes viral. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's real. There's no grandstanding, no speeches, just raw pain, and it hits harder than any headline. You scroll through the comments, and it's a flood of disbelief, grief, and outrage. You could feel his soul cracking. How do you stay calm when the system tells you your son's life didn't matter? This broke me. But not everyone is silent. A handful of Karmelo supporters attempt to defend the decision, saying he hasn't been convicted, that due process matters. But those voices are quickly drowned out, not by hate, but by heartbreak. This isn't about guilt anymore, it's about grief. And Jeffrey's grief? It's become the face of a father failed by everything. Back inside the courthouse, the room never quite resets. The energy is off. Even Karmelo looks different, his expression blank, maybe even uneasy. For the first time, you notice him glance over his shoulder, not at the evidence, but at the man whose life he's altered forever. But it's too late, because no matter what happens next, no matter what legal decisions come, Jeffrey's pain is now part of the record. Not in the official transcripts, not in a cross-examination, but in the eyes of every person who saw a father break because justice never showed up when it mattered most. And you ask yourself, how do you rebuild after the system proves it never had your back? What's the point of a courtroom when the hurt walks out while the accused stays seated? And when a father breaks in front of the world, who's brave enough to pick him up? The next morning, the footage of Jeffery Metcalf's breakdown is everywhere. News anchors pause mid-sentence to let the clip breathe. Podcasts open with the sound of his voice, trembling, haunted. Even major platforms like CNN and The Shade Room run it side by side with headlines like, "Karmelo walks free, father collapses in court." But while the public mourns with him, the justice system doesn't slow down. Court resumes on schedule. Karmelo walks back in wearing the same calm face he's worn for weeks. And while his legal team tries to shift the attention back to process and facts, no one can forget what happened the day before. Because something fundamental changed when Jeffery Metcalf broke in that courtroom. The room still holds its shape, but the respect is gone. No one trusts this process anymore. Inside the overflow room, sources say Metcalf's family refused to re-enter. His wife reportedly said, "We're not props for their quiet little drama. They can play pretend. We're done pretending." Outside, the energy is even more raw. Protesters begin gathering again, not just in Austin's name, but in Jeffrey's. Signs read, "Fathers deserve justice too. You let a killer walk. We heard his cry. Did you?" And then the worst part hits you. There's no legal recourse for heartbreak, no appeal for dignity, no sentence for silence. You're left wondering, what's the point of showing up to court when the process rewards composure and punishes grief? Why does a father's raw emotion feel like the only honest thing in the entire building? And how many more moments like this will pass before someone finally says, "Enough"? Because Jeffery Metcalf didn't just cry. He cracked open the truth, and now the world is watching. Not the evidence, not the closing arguments, but the wound the court tried to ignore. Now, the courtroom isn't just on edge, it's under scrutiny, not because of legal missteps, but because of what people are calling emotional negligence. Journalists, legal analysts, even former judges are weighing in, asking the question the court never wanted to hear. How do you continue a trial when the father of the victim can't even stay in the room? It's not just about grief anymore, it's about the optics of ignoring it. Clips of Jeffery Metcalf's breakdown are now being stitched into larger narratives online. Videos titled "The Day the Justice System Turned Its Back," or "When Silence Was Louder Than the Verdict." People aren't waiting for closing statements. They've already decided this case isn't just about guilt, it's about how the system handles pain. And you start to realize this trial is no longer under the court's control, it's under the public's. Inside the courthouse, you notice subtle changes. The judge speaks more cautiously. Bailiffs keep one eye on the gallery at all times. Even Karmelo's lawyers avoid long, emotional statements, as if trying to avoid waking a beast they no longer understand. But outside, it's already awake. Supporters are showing up in silence, dressed in black, holding signs with no slogans, just Austin's face. Some carry a simple quote in bold font: "He killed my boy, and you let him walk." It's become more than a sentence. It's become a symbol, a father's final plea that everyone heard, except the people it was meant for. And you ask yourself, how long can a trial pretend to be neutral when grief is this loud? What happens when justice ignores emotion long enough that the streets pick it up instead? And can any verdict heal a system that never once tried to feel? Because Jeffery Metcalf may have broken in court. But what's breaking now is much bigger than him. Now the backlash turns inward, not just toward the system, but toward everyone who stayed silent when it cracked. Commentators, influencers, even celebrities who once spoke cautiously about the case are being dragged into the storm. Not for what they said, but for what they didn't. A viral thread titled "The Silence Around Jeffery Metcalf's Breakdown Should Haunt You" calls out every major figure who posted about Karmelo's arrest, but hasn't said a word since the father's collapse in court. One reply sums up the mood. "You marched for a suspect, but you won't even whisper for a grieving dad?" It stings because it's true. This isn't about guilt or innocence anymore. It's about who's afforded empathy. And Jeffery Metcalf, despite losing everything, was left to grieve alone. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, you start noticing something strange. The prosecution is shifting. They're no longer building a case for conviction. They're building a case for compassion. Subtle choices, humanizing photos of Austin, softer tones in witness questioning, repeated references to the family's absence. It's like they're trying to speak to the public, not the judge. And maybe they are, because now, the court of public opinion is louder than the bench. You ask yourself, has the courtroom lost its authority when the people outside are doing the moral math? Can justice survive in a system that requires victims to behave perfectly, quietly, without pain? And when a father breaks on the record, do we call it a disruption or a warning? Because what happened to Jeffery Metcalf wasn't just emotional, it was a rupture of faith, of trust, of the illusion that grief has a place in court. And that rupture is spreading from one man to a movement. Now even the media can't keep its distance. What started as standard coverage has turned into a full-on reckoning. Major outlets are dropping the legal jargon and finally calling it what it is: emotional injustice. Headlines no longer read "Trial Continues" or "Closing Arguments Loom." Instead, you see, "Father shattered by court decision to let teen suspect walk free." Is the legal system built to punish pain? Why Jeffery Metcalf's tears are resonating louder than the verdict. And for once, it's not just noise. People are listening. Even courtroom staff, usually silent players in the background, are reportedly shaken. A court clerk is overheard saying, "That man broke down right in front of us and nobody moved. Not even the judge." It wasn't policy that failed him, it was humanity. And now that failure is becoming the story. The prosecution, now feeling the pressure, starts to weave emotional language directly into its final arguments. They begin referencing Jeffery by name, not just Austin, not just the facts, but the father, the man left behind, The man whose cry for justice is now louder than anything in the courtroom. You see it happening in real time. The tone of the trial has shifted, the defense is more cautious, the judge is visibly uncomfortable, as if realizing this is no longer just about law, it's about legacy. And for the public, it's no longer a question of evidence, it's a question of conscience. You ask yourself, is a courtroom still credible when it can't handle human grief? What happens when compassion becomes a liability in a system built for procedure, not people? And most importantly, how do we move forward when a father's cry rings louder than the verdict ever could? Because Jeffery Metcalf didn't just mourn. He exposed a flaw so big, no one in that building can pretend they didn't hear it. And just like that, the trial inches toward a conclusion, but the damage has already been done. No matter what verdict the court hands down, you know this case will be remembered for something else entirely. Not just a stabbing, not just a defense, but the moment the system turned its back on a grieving father, and the world saw it happen. Jeffery Metcalf didn't throw a chair, he didn't threaten a soul, he simply broke. And in doing so, he told the truth the courtroom never wanted to hear. That justice, true justice, isn't just about facts, it's about feeling. And when a father's pain is too loud for the court to tolerate, but a killer's silence is allowed to sit without challenge, something is broken far beyond that courtroom door. Outside, the movement has grown. Not one of rage, but of reckoning. People aren't just protesting anymore, they're demanding reform, mandatory grief counselors for victims' families, the right for parents to speak in the room before critical decisions, limits on how the system sterilizes pain in the name of procedure. Because Jeffery didn't just expose a crack in the system, he revealed an absence of empathy, of humanity, of space for those who actually lost something real. And as the final days of testimony close, the cameras may still focus on the attorneys, on Karmelo, on the legal theater unfolding. But the people? They're still thinking about the father who stood, shattered, and whispered what the world will never forget. He killed my boy, and you let him walk. And no matter how this ends on paper, that will be the line that echoes long after the verdict, because some truths aren't meant to be filed away.